At 7,800 feet in the Sawtooth Wilderness, winter doesn't arrive gradually. It detonates. 1 hour, the aspens are dropping gold leaves in 50-degree sunshine. The next, the temperature has cratered to 28, and the wind is driving ice pellets sideways hard enough to strip bark. Maren Frost had lived at altitude long enough to read the signs. She'd learned them the winter she turned 24, when the mountain took her husband in an avalanche and taught her that grief is just another kind of cold you learn to carry. At 26, she carried it well. The cabin helped. 2 rooms, log walls, thick enough to stop a grizzly, chinked tight enough to hold out hell itself. Her late husband Daniel had built it that way. Stone mason's hands, a stone mason's mind. Everything square level true. The tools still hung on the wall where he'd left them. She couldn't bring herself to move them. She talked to them sometimes. Talked to Flint, her one-horned goat, who was older than some marriages and twice as stubborn. Talked to the hawks riding thermals above the ridge. It wasn't madness, it was maintenance. The way you maintain your voice so it doesn't rust into something you can't use anymore. On this particular afternoon, October 27th, the silence felt different. Wrong. The birds stopped first, not gradually, all at once like a candle blown out. Every jay, every finch, every small creature that had made the ridge its home went silent simultaneously, and the absence of that sound was louder than any alarm. Maren straightened from where she'd been gathering the last rose hips of the season. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked west. The smell hit her before the cold did. Not rain. Rain smelled of wet dust and clean electricity. This was something else. Iron, cold and metallic and sharp. The smell of a freeze so deep it could find the water inside stone and split it open. Early, the word landed in her gut like a weight. Too early. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 12 minutes. The world went from crisp autumn to the killing edge of deep winter while she stood watching it happen. The first flakes didn't drift. They drove sideways, hard little pellets of ice that stung like splinters against any exposed skin. Maren moved. No panic. Only the efficient and deliberate speed of someone who understood that panic costs you time you don't have. She got Flint into a shed. She stacked wood high on the porch. She checked the window latches. The door seals the chimney draw. She was good at this. She had been good at this for 2 years alone, and some part of her that she didn't examine too closely had accepted that she would be good at it alone for the rest of her life. She was reaching for the iron latch to seal herself inside. The fire was already built up the cabin, warmed the storm not yet at full force. When she heard it, she went completely still. Cutting through the roar of the wind, unmistakable, was a sound of pure and frantic terror. Not a coyote, not a mountain cat, the sound of a horse. A domestic animal. An animal that knew humans. An animal that had learned to expect safety from them, completely undone by fear. Most people would have closed the door. Most people would have told themselves it was the wind playing tricks, that it was too dark, that the storm was too dangerous, that they had done enough just by surviving this far. Maren stood with her hand on the latch and felt the pull of the fire behind her warm and certain. Then she felt the other pull, the one that had been in her as long as she could remember, the one that had made her a healer before she knew the word for it. She turned around. She pulled on her heavy coat, wound her scarf until only her eyes showed, took her rope from the wall hook, and lit the storm lantern, even though she knew its light would be nearly useless against a whiteout this dense. Foolish woman, she said to herself. Stepping off the porch, she meant it. She also kept walking. The ravine at the edge of her property was a place she knew better than she knew her own face. Every root, every loose stone, every place where the ground dropped away without warning. She had walked it in summer light and in total autumn darkness, and knew it the way you know the things that have tried to kill you and failed. In a blizzard with the wind screaming and the drifts already shin deep, it was something else entirely. She held her lantern over the edge. The beam caught only swirling snow at first, millions of flakes in furious motion. Then her eyes adjusted and she saw it. A wagon overturned, caught between 2 boulders 85 feet down the slope. One wheel still turning in the wind, lazy and purposeless. A bay gelding thrashing in the traces, trying to free itself from the leather with the blind desperation of an animal that has given up on strategy and retreated to pure survival instinct. Maren tied her rope to a pine and went down. It was a controlled fall more than a descent. Ice-slicked branches whipping her face, her boots finding purchase, and losing it and finding it again. When she reached the ravine floor, the snow was drifted deep against the boulders, and she moved to the horse first, cutting the traces with her belt knife, and letting the animal scramble free. Then she turned toward the shelter of the overturned wagon bed and stopped. There, tucked into the small, dry space created by the wagon and the roots of an ancient pine, was a man. He was perhaps 30, dark hair plastered flat by the snow, a face that even slack with unconsciousness carried the marks of someone accustomed to holding a great deal in a small, controlled space. He might have been sleeping, except for the color of his skin, pale in the way that goes beyond winter pallor into something that turns a healer's stomach. He was wearing a thin cotton shirt soaked through and clinging. No coat. She understood in a single crashing instant. He had taken it off deliberately. He had wrapped it carefully despite hands that must have already been losing sensation, despite everything in his body screaming at him to keep it around two small shapes pressed against his chest. Two little girls, twins, no more than 5 years old, with amber eyes wide and luminous in the lantern light, staring up at her from inside the shelter of their father's coat and their father's frozen arms. Maren dropped to her knees in the snow. The older instinct, older than thought, older than reason, took over completely. She crawled into the shelter, pressed her fingers to the man's throat, and found it there. A pulse, thread thin, fading but present. Not yet, some fierce, certain part of her said. Not on my mountain. One of the girls reached out a small, trembling hand and touched Maren's glove. Her fingers were ice cold even through the leather. Her eyes, those enormous amber eyes, were red-rimmed from crying that had gone on too long. Papa won't wake up, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible through the roar of the storm. He said he was burning up. He gave us his coat. And then her voice cracked. He stopped talking. Maren felt the tear freeze on her own cheek before she felt it fall. She looked at this man she had never seen before. This stranger who had given his last warmth to his children with the same instinct she had followed down a rope in a blizzard. Not because it was strategic, not because someone was watching, but because some things simply are not negotiable. She pulled her scarf from her own neck and wrapped it around his. Little one, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. My name is Maren. My cabin is up the ridge. It is warm and it has food, and I have kept people breathing who were in far worse shape than your father. She met each pair of amber eyes in turn. I am going to get you all out of this ravine, but I am going to need you to be very brave for just a little while longer. Can you do that? The taller girl looked at her for a long, solemn moment, and then she nodded. Good, Maren said. Hold on to each other. Don't let go. She turned back to the slope she had just come down and began to figure out how to go back up it, carrying 3 people with 2 hands and a length of rope. She had no sled, no team. What she had was the wreckage of a wagon, the rope, and the particular quality of stubbornness that develops in a woman who has survived 2 years on a high mountain ridge through nothing but her own refusal to stop. She lashed 2 shattered planks together into a drag. She loaded the man onto it, rolling his dead weight through the snow, gritting her teeth, fighting the numbness spreading through her own fingers. She tucked the girls against her body as she climbed the rope around her waist and digging her boots into the frozen slope, one agonizing inch at a time. The wind drove against her like a living thing trying to push her back down. The ice grabbed at her boots. Her lungs burned with the cold, thin air, and her shoulders screamed with the weight, and the wind kept screaming back. And at some point, she stopped thinking entirely and just moved because thinking about how far was left would have ended her. 53 minutes to cover ground that should have taken 10. When the dark shape of her cabin finally loomed out of the whiteout, she didn't feel relief. Relief was a luxury. She felt the door, found the latch, kicked it open, and pulled them inside. The silence when the door shut behind them was so sudden and absolute, it almost knocked her down. The roar cut off. The fire breathed quietly in the grate. The cabin smelled of sage and safety and the particular warmth of a place that had been tended carefully over a long time. She stood in the middle of it, 3 strangers arranged around her, and finally let herself breathe. Then she got to work. For 3 days, the storm buried the ridge in 4 feet of snow. The man, she learned his name was Thane in the brief hoarse whisper he managed before the fever pulled him back under burned hot for 2 days. She found the cracked rib quickly, a deep bruise blooming across his side where the wagon had caught him. She moved through the hours with the tunnel-focused calm of a healer in a crisis. Cool rags, willow bark, tea fire stoked high temperature, monitored through the night when she should have been sleeping and wasn't. October 27th became 28th, became 29th. Time moved in increments measured by firewood consumed and snow accumulation outside the window and the rise and fall of breathing from the corner bed. She logged his vitals in the leather journal where she tracked everything. Patient M, age approximately 30. Hypothermia, stage 2 upon arrival. Body temperature estimated 89 degrees Fahrenheit. Fever onset hour, 4 peak 104.3 degrees at hour 36. Cracked ribs 7 and 8 left side. Dehydration severe. Administered willow bark yarrow comfrey, poultice, warm fluids via dropper when conscious enough to swallow. What she hadn't expected, what she wasn't prepared for despite everything, were the girls, Ash and Briar, 5 years old, with those amber eyes that were somehow simultaneously ancient and heartbreakingly young. For the first day, they didn't speak. They sat pressed against each other on the bearskin rug near the hearth, watching her with the exhausted wariness of small creatures that have learned the world cannot be trusted. Marin recognized that look. She had seen it in her own mirror in the months after she lost Daniel. She didn't push them. She didn't try to coax or charm or hurry the fear out of them. She simply moved through the cabin doing what needed doing. Stirring the pot, tending the fire, changing the cool rags on their father's forehead, and let them watch. Let them learn at their own pace that she was safe. She set a heavy pot over the fire, dried venison, wild onions, sage. The smell filled the cabin slowly. Rich, grounding, ancient. She hummed as she worked. No words, just a low, steady melody, the kind her own grandmother had hummed. The kind that said, underneath everything, you are safe here. Whatever else is true, you are safe here. On the second evening, while the wind rattled the shutters hard enough to make the candle flames lean, she sat in her rocking chair mending one of the girls' torn hems. She didn't look at them directly. She had learned that direct eye contact with traumatized creatures, human or otherwise, could feel like pressure. You know, she said softly to the room rather than to anyone in it. This cabin used to get awfully lonely in a storm. I used to think the wind was trying to scare me. She let the needle flash in the firelight. Took me a while to realize it's not trying to frighten anyone. It's just cold and looking for somewhere warm to stop. She looked up and found the smaller girl watching her. Same as the rest of us. The other girl was clutching a ragged square of blanket. Her eyes were on Marin's face with an expression of terrible, careful hope. Are you hungry, little bird? A tiny nod, almost invisible. Marin ladled broth into 2 tin cups. She did not bring them to the girls. She set them on the floor within easy reach and stepped back. An offering, not a command, no strings, no expectations. Slowly, cautiously, they crept forward and drank. And as the warmth moved through them, something moved through the room as well. Something that had been locked went fractionally quietly open. Later that night, Marin was at the stove when she felt it, a small, warm weight pressing against her leg. She went absolutely still. The smaller girl had drifted over in a half-sleep, wrapped her small arms around Marin's skirt, and pressed her cheek against her thigh. She wasn't asking for anything. She had simply found the safest point in the room and anchored herself to it. Marin did not move. Her leg cramped. She ignored it. She stood in the wood smoke and sage quiet of her kitchen while this small stranger slept against her and felt something she had not felt in 2 years. The specific, irreplaceable weight of being needed. Not for what she could do, for what she simply was. The hollow place in her chest, the one she had learned to work around and carry carefully and never examine too closely, began slowly, tentatively, like ice at the very first edge of spring, to fill. On the third morning, the fever broke. Marin was grinding coffee when the sound of shifting fabric came from the corner bed. She turned. The man was trying to sit up, and his hand flying to his ribs the moment he moved, his face draining white. Don't, she said, crossing the room quickly. Cracked rib. Fever that's only just agreed to release you. Sit up too fast and I'll be starting over. He sank back against the pillow with a controlled breath that told her he was accustomed to managing pain without showing it. His eyes cleared. Dark, amber, sharp, intelligent. The eyes of someone used to reading rooms quickly and trusting their own read. They found the girls first, asleep near the hearth, breathing steadily. He exhaled. The sound of it carried the accumulated weight of something Marin recognized. Terror that has been held at bay for so long that releasing it even a fraction feels almost worse than holding it. Then he looked at her properly, the measuring look of a man reassembling information. My daughters, he said. His voice was rough from the fever, but beneath it was a cadence that didn't match his situation. He sounded like someone playing a role he had chosen carefully. Are they fed warm? Ash tried to rearrange my herb jars by color yesterday morning. Briar ate enough venison stew to worry me. Marin pulled a chair to his bedside. I'm Marin. Thane, a beat. Just the one name, no more. She noted the omission. She noted the quality of the cotton she had washed and hung to dry. Fine weave thread count too high for working class wear. She noted the way his hands, strong, broad, capable hands, bore calluses in places that suggested trained combat rather than manual labor. She noted the scar that cut through his right eyebrow, clean and straight, the kind made by a blade held by someone who knew what they were doing. She noted all of it and set it aside. "You were running," she said. His eyes sharpened. The mask came up quick, practiced, reflexive. "I had reasons," he said carefully. "I'm sure you did." She stood and smoothed her apron. The snow drifted 4 feet against the door overnight. "You aren't going anywhere for several days, and whatever you're running from isn't getting up here either. So rest." She met his eyes evenly. "The truth keeps." He stared at her. She had the distinct impression he was not often spoken to this way. "Thank you," he said finally, quietly, like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was only now cautiously setting one end of it down. "I have nothing to offer you." Maren glanced at the smaller girl who was stirring in her sleep, reaching out one small hand into the empty air as if searching for something to hold. "You'd be surprised," she said, and she turned back to the stove. As the storm broke and the sun returned blazing on fresh drifts, something shifted in the cabin's rhythm. Thane's strength came back, and with it a restlessness he couldn't contain, and she suspected hadn't needed to contain in a very long time. One morning, November 1st, 5 days after the rescue, she woke to a sound she hadn't heard since before Daniel died, the solid rhythmic crack of an axe splitting pine. She looked out the window. He was there, breath pluming in the cold air, working through her backlog of unsplit wood with an ease that made her suspect he had spent considerable time in his life doing exactly this, not because he had to, but because he needed to do something with his body when his mind was too full. Later, she found him on the roof. "You have a cracked rib," she called up, hands on her hips. He looked down. The grin that crossed his face was so sudden and unguarded, it startled her. It didn't match the careful, controlled man she had been nursing. It was younger, freer, like something that had been stored somewhere and released without permission. "That corner leak," he said, "the one over your herb rack, found spare shingles in the shed. It won't drip anymore." She stood there trying to formulate an argument about structural safety and cracked ribs and the general inadvisability of climbing roofs during recovery. She couldn't find one that felt honest. What she felt instead was a tightness in her chest that she recognized and didn't want to examine. The feeling of something being given back to her that she had quietly, privately accepted was gone forever. The feeling of not being the only one holding everything up. The girls had transformed. The silence was gone, entirely replaced by small feet running on floorboards, by giggles that bounced off the log walls, by Ash reorganizing things with a focused, proprietary air that reminded Maren uncomfortably of herself. They followed her through every task. They sorted beans. They held yarn. They asked questions in the unstoppable, relentless way of 5-year-olds who have decided you are safe enough to be curious about. And Thane watched them. He watched them the way a man watches something he was afraid of losing and hasn't yet fully accepted that he still has. One evening, November 6th, day 10, the fire had burned low. The girls were asleep in the loft Maren had cleared for them, and she sat at the heavy oak table working a mortar and pestle, grinding comfrey root into paste. Slow and difficult. Her hands stained green and brown and raw from the cold. She felt his eyes on her. She looked up. He was sitting across the room, a book open on his knee that he clearly hadn't read a word of in some time. "I'm making a mess," she said, reaching for a rag. "Don't," his voice was quiet. "Don't wipe it away." She stopped. He set the book down and walked to the table. He didn't touch her. He stood close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him and looked down at her stained, rough-knuckled hands with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Something careful in it. Something that had been turned over and considered before being brought out. "I grew up around people who were frightened of their hands," he said, "who treated them as things to be protected rather than used." He reached out and covered her rough hand with his own. Warm, steady, unhurried. "These hands pulled my daughters out of the snow. They healed me. They split wood and make medicine and fix what breaks." His eyes found hers, dark, direct. Something in them she hadn't seen before. Something that had been behind the mask and was only now carefully stepping out from behind it. "I know which kind I prefer." The air in the room stopped moving. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't the kind of compliment designed to make a woman look down and smile. It was the kind that lands in the chest like a key turning. Recognizing something true about you that you had almost convinced yourself didn't matter. She let herself, for one honest, unguarded moment, imagine it. this continuing. Then she looked at the window, at the dark outside, the ice, the mountains that kept their own counsel. 2 days later, November 7th, the thaw came, and the shadow returned to Thane's face like a door closing. She watched it happen over the course of a single morning, the warmth draining out, replaced by something tightly controlled and braced. He spent long hours at the window, one hand resting on the sill, his gaze fixed on the tree line below, with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting for something and has just heard it start. "We have to leave," he said that evening. "Before the trail opens fully, you're barely healed. If I stay any longer," he stopped. His jaw worked. "I won't bring what's following us to your door, Maren." "I can't," she wanted to press. The half-truth in his face was visible to her now, thin as old linen held to the light. Men didn't look at horizons with that specific dread over debts or disputes. He was waiting for something larger, something that wore authority and expected to be obeyed. But she had lived on this ridge for 2 years. She understood the kind of silence a person wraps around themselves when the wound is too fresh for air. She didn't pry the lid off it. She packed them food instead. Dried meat, hardtack medicine, enough for a week. She mended the girls' coats by firelight, stitching each seam twice, pretending she couldn't feel the thing building in her chest that she had no business feeling. The next morning, November 8th, day 12, was crystalline, dazzling, deceptive. That particular mountain brightness that felt like a gift and was actually a warning. They were loading the repaired wagon. Thane had rebuilt it from salvaged wood in 3 days, which told her more about him than anything he had said. When the sound came from the tree line, not hooves, not shouting, a single deliberate crack of a twig, the sound of something that wanted to be heard. Maren spun her rifle up before the instinct had finished traveling from her ears to her hands. "Get the girls inside," she said, flat quiet, the voice she used when she meant it. Thane didn't move. She felt it happen beside her. A shift in his posture so complete it was almost physical. The man she had come to know in the firelight, the one who grinned from rooftops and told her she was necessary, simply receded. What was left in his place was older, harder, and very still, in the way of something accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any given room. "It's too late," he said. The words were quiet and final. "Maren," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What comes out of those trees, they're not here to hurt you, but they will take me. They will take my daughters, and there is nothing I can do to stop them unless you—" He stopped. "Unless I what?" "Trust me. One more time. Trust that I'm not what you think I am." She looked at him, at the man who had split her wood and fixed her roof and held her stained hands like they were something precious. "I don't know what you are," she said. The figures that emerged from the pines move the way soldiers move when they are not afraid of what they are walking toward. 12 riders, black leather silver wolf emblems on their chests, weapons present and not drawn, which somehow communicated more menace than if they had been aimed. At their head, a man, perhaps 45, grizzled, scarred, with the bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime enforcing orders he didn't necessarily agree with, but would die before he disobeyed. He saw Thane and stopped. His hand went to his chest. A salute, sharp military absolute. "Your Majesty," he said. "Thank the gods. King Aldrich is dying." The words hung in the frozen air like smoke. "Your Majesty." Maren's rifle didn't waver. Her hand stayed steady even as her mind reordered everything she thought she knew. The man beside her, the careful lie he'd wrapped around himself like the coat he'd given his daughters. The truth she'd suspected but hadn't named. "Your Majesty." Not a surveyor, not a man running from employment disputes or bad debts, or even a controlling family trying to force an unwanted marriage. A king. The lead rider dismounted. He was built like a man who'd spent 30 years in armor and still wore it even when he didn't have to. His face carried the particular wariness that comes from watching things you care about slip through your fingers despite your best efforts. "Captain Royce Thane," said quietly. His voice had changed. Not louder, but denser somehow. The voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed even when he spoke softly. "Stand down. She's not a threat." Royce's eyes flicked to Maren's rifle, then to Thane's position, standing slightly in front of her, protective even now, and something that might have been approval crossed his weathered face. "Ma'am," he inclined his head to Maren, no disrespect intended. "But we've been tracking His Majesty for 2 weeks across 2 mountain ranges in weather that's killed better men than us. When the trail went cold in the blizzard, we feared the worst. You'll forgive us for being cautious." 2 weeks, Marin said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He's been here 12 days. Then you've kept him alive longer than we dared hope. Royce's gaze shifted back to Thane. Sire, your father, I heard you, Thane said. How long days? Maybe a week if the healers are right. He's been asking for you. Behind Royce, the other riders had fanned out into a loose perimeter. Professional, efficient, the kind of formation you only got from men who trained together long enough that they didn't need to discuss it. One of them, younger, barely out of his 20s, kept glancing at the cabin. Ash and Briar were visible in the window, pressed against the glass, watching with those enormous amber eyes, the girls, Royce said. Are they safe, Thane said. The word came out sharp enough to cut. Fed warm and safer than they've been in months. That's not what Royce stopped himself. Sire, the Dowager is with us, she insisted. Said the girls would need their grandmother. From behind the line of riders, a second horse approached. Not ridden, drawn. A carriage black lacquered wood with silver fittings that caught the morning light and threw it back like a challenge. The door opened before the carriage had fully stopped. The woman who emerged was beautiful in the way of things that have been polished so long and so carefully that you can no longer see what they look like before the polishing started. She wore furs that probably cost more than Marin's entire cabin. Her hair was silver blonde, arranged in a style that looked effortless and had likely taken an hour to achieve. Her face was smooth, unlined in the way that spoke of either exceptional genetics or exceptional intervention. But it was her eyes that Marin noticed. Pale blue, cold. The kind of eyes that assessed value quickly and discarded what didn't meet the threshold. Those eyes found Thane first. Relief flooded across her face, performative and perfectly timed. Gray, she said. She never called him Thane. Marin noticed. Gray, darling, thank the stars. 2 weeks of silence. Do you have any idea what you put us through? She moved toward him, arms outstretched for an embrace he didn't return. Isolde, Thane said. His voice was flat, polite, empty. I told you not to come. Your father is dying. Of course I came. She turned her attention to the cabin, to the window where the girls watched. Her expression softened into something that was probably meant to look grandmotherly, but came across more like a merchant appraising merchandise. Come, darlings. Come to grandmother. We have a warm carriage, blankets, honeyed cakes. Everything you've been missing. She opened her arms, waiting. The girls looked at the carriage. They looked at the strangers in their black and silver. They looked at the woman with her furs and her practiced smile. Then simultaneously, with the unerring instinct of small children who have learned in the hardest possible way the difference between real safety and its performance, they looked at Marin and ran. Briar hit Marin's legs first, small arms wrapping around her thighs with the force of total commitment. Ash was half a step behind, gripping Marin's skirt with both hands, small feet planted in the muddy snow, with an immovability that was frankly impressive for someone who weighed 40 pounds. No go, Briar said. Her voice was perfectly steady. Stay with Mama, Marin. Don't make us leave her, Ash added, quieter but no less certain. The clearing went silent in the way that clearings go silent when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Isolde's arms were still open around empty air. The color left her face, then came back wrong. Spots of red high on her cheekbones that spoke of fury barely controlled. Mama, she said. The word came out strangled. What has she done to them? She wheeled on Thane, the grandmother performance shredding like wet paper. She's turned them against their own blood. 2 weeks alone, with a stranger, and they don't even know. She kept them alive, Thane said. His voice was very quiet, the kind of quiet that made everyone in the clearing go still. Which is more than the palace managed. How dare you enough? The word cracked across the space like a whip. Royce stepped between them, his hand raised. Ma'am, with respect, this is neither the time nor the place. Isolde's mouth snapped shut, but her eyes promised that this conversation was far from over. Royce turned to Marin. His expression had shifted, not hostile, but measuring, trying to reconcile the mountain hermit he'd expected to find with the woman who had 2 royal heirs anchored to her legs like she was the only fixed point in their world. Ma'am, he said, I don't know your name. Marin Frost, Miss Frost. He said it like he was testing the weight of it. You saved His Majesty's life. I pulled 3 people out of a blizzard, Marin said. I didn't know who any of them were. And yet they know who you are. Royce glanced down at the girls. Or at least they know what you are to them. Isolde made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something sharper. She's nothing, she said. A mountain hermit. Omega, unmated, no family, no status. She has no claim here. She has the claim I give her, Thane said. He moved then, placed himself between his stepmother and Marin with a deliberateness that was unmistakable. Not aggressive, not dramatic, simply final. The way you place yourself in a doorway when you have decided that what is behind you is worth protecting at whatever cost is asked. He held out his hand to Marin. She looked at the man who had grinned from her rooftop and told her she was necessary in a voice that held no pretense. She took his hand. He faced Royce, not his stepmother, the man who represented duty and kingdom and everything Thane had apparently been running from. I've been heir to a throne my entire life, he said. I understood duty. I understood legacy. I understood what the bloodline is supposed to represent. His voice was steady and quiet and absolutely certain. The way mountains are certain, not aggressive, just immovable. I didn't understand what a home was until a woman I'd never met came down a rope in a blizzard and dragged my daughters and me back from the edge of dying, without being asked, without expectation, without anything to gain. He looked at Royce directly. You asked me once what kind of king I intended to be. I'm showing you. The silence stretched. Royce looked at Thane, then at Marin, at the girls still anchored to her legs, at the cabin behind her tight and warm and carefully tended, at the woman herself plain and capable and meeting his gaze without flinching. He reached into his coat. For a terrible moment, Marin thought weapon. But what he pulled out was a leather pouch, heavy, the particular clink of old gold. His Majesty the King Regent sent this, Royce said. He opened the pouch. 50 gold sovereigns spilled into his palm, catching the light. For the woman who saved his son, the crown pays its debts. He held the pouch toward Marin. She looked at the gold. She looked at the man holding it. She looked at the two girls anchored to her legs, at Thane standing rigid and braced beside her, at the mountains standing enormous and patient above everything indifferent to kings and debts, in the particular smallness of this moment against the scale of them. It's a generous offer, Marin said softly. Royce blinked. Ma'am, I'm sure it is. She took a breath. I pulled them out of the snow because they were dying. I fed them because they were hungry. I sat up through 3 nights of fever because that is what you do when someone needs it. Her voice didn't shake. She had decided somewhere on the slope of that ravine in the blizzard that she was done apologizing for the kind of person she was. You cannot pay for that with gold, and I wouldn't let you try. Royce went still. Behind him, one of the younger riders made a sound that might have been a cough or might have been a strangled laugh. Isolde drew breath to speak. Thane moved first. His hand tightened on Marin's. Captain Royce, he said, my father is dying. I will come, but not alone. Sire, the girls stay with her. I stay with her. We ride together or we don't ride at all. Your Majesty, Isolde said, her voice dripping acid. You cannot possibly expect the court to accept. I don't care what the court accepts. Thane's voice had gone cold, empty of everything except will. You orchestrated this. The contract, the pressure, the arranged marriage, I explicitly refused. You pushed until I had no choice but to run. That's not, you used my daughters as leverage, told me they needed stability, needed a mother figure, needed the match with the Harrow family for their own protection. He took a step toward her. You made their safety conditional on my obedience. Isolde's face went carefully blank. I did what was necessary for the kingdom. You did what was necessary to control me. Thane's hand was still locked with Marin's, warm, steady, anchoring. I'm done being controlled. Royce cleared his throat. Sire, with respect, Lord Chancellor Voss has been active in your absence. The betrothal contract with Lady Seraphine Crowe was ratified by the Council 4 days ago. He's arguing emergency succession protocols. Without you present to contest it, the contract is void. It's sealed, my lord, witnessed. Legal under, I don't care what it's legal under. Thane's voice could have cut stone. I never signed it. My father signed it under duress, while being systematically poisoned by the man who benefits most from seeing me married off and contained. The clearing went dead silent. Poison, Royce repeated. His hand had moved to his sword without him seeming to notice. You're certain. Thane looked at Marin. She felt the weight of that gaze, the question in it. Marin had spent 2 years learning to read what bodies said when words failed them. She'd seen sickness in all its variations. Natural decline, accident, infection, exposure. Each had its own signature. If your father is dying the way you described, she said slowly, it's not age, not illness. The symptoms you mentioned, the tremors, the confusion, the way his strength comes and goes in cycles, that's not how bodies fail naturally. What is it? Poison. Slow acting. Probably hemlock derivative dosed carefully over months to look like natural decline. She met Royce's eyes. I can't be certain without examining him. But I'd stake my reputation on it. You're a healer, Isolde said. What reputation? A better one than whoever's been treating the king, Marin said flatly. Royce's jaw worked. He looked at Thane, at Marin, at the girls. Some internal calculation was happening behind his eyes. The math of loyalty and duty and what happens when they point in different directions. Sire, he said finally, if what you're saying is true, if Lord Chancellor Voss is behind this, we need proof. We need to get you to Ashfeld Keep. We need to get Miss Frost to your father. And we need to do it quietly before Voss knows you're coming. Then we ride, Thane said. Today. Now. The girls go with us, Marin added, non-negotiable. Isolde made a sound of protest. Royce silenced her with a look. Agreed, he said. He glanced at the cabin at the loaded wagon. You have supplies enough for the journey. Then we leave within the hour. He turned to his men. Perimeter sweep. Make sure we weren't followed. Jenkins, bring up the spare horses. His Majesty and Miss Frost will need mounts. The girls can ride in the wagon. One of the riders peeled off, disappearing into the trees. The others moved with the efficient precision of men who'd done this 1,000 times. Royce stepped closer to Marin, close enough that Isolde couldn't hear. Miss Frost, he said quietly, you don't know what you're walking into. The capital, it's not like this. He gestured at the mountains, the cabin, the clean, simple lines of a world where things made sense. It's politics and power, and people who will smile while they put a knife in your back. I've gutted enough animals to know where the knife goes, Marin said. I'll manage. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. I believe you will. The next hour moved in a blur of organized chaos. Marin packed her medical supplies, golden seal yarrow, comfrey, willow bark, activated charcoal milk thistle. Everything she had that might counteract slow poison. She wrapped them in oilcloth, labeled each bundle in the efficient shorthand she'd developed over 2 years of working alone. Thane loaded the wagon with the supplies he'd already prepared. Food, water, blankets. He moved like a man who'd done this before. Fast, methodical, wasting no motion. The girls stayed close to Marin. Not clinging anymore, but orbiting. Ash helped fold bandages with a precision that suggested she'd been watching carefully how Marin did things. Briar asked questions in a steady stream that would have been exhausting if it wasn't so earnest. Why do we have to go? Where is Grandpa? Will you still be with us? Is Flint coming too? Flint stays here, Marin said, scratching the old goat's chin. Mrs. Kowalski will check on him. She'd already sent one of Royce's younger riders down the mountain with a message for her neighbor. The woman was 73, half-deaf and meaner than a badger, but she owed Marin for setting her broken wrist last winter, and she'd die before she let a debt go unpaid. The cabin looked smaller somehow as Marin locked the door. 2 years she'd lived here. 2 years of learning to be alone without being lonely. 2 years of convincing herself that this was enough. She turned her back on it and didn't look again. They rode out as the sun hit its zenith. Royce had given Marin a gray mare with intelligent eyes and a smooth gait. Thane rode beside her on a black gelding that had probably cost more than most people made in a year. The girls rode in the wagon tucked under blankets, watching the trees slide past with wide eyes. Isolde rode in her carriage, curtains drawn, making a point. The first hour passed in silence, broken only by the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hooves on frozen ground. They were descending, slowly but steadily, dropping from the high country where Marin had made her life into the foothills, where civilization started to reassert itself. Royce rode point, professional, alert. His eyes never stopped moving. It was Thane who finally broke the silence. You have questions, he said, not looking at Marin, but speaking quietly enough that only she could hear. Several hundred, Marin said. Ask, why did you lie? Because the truth would have changed how you saw me. He glanced at her then, quick searching. When you found us in that ravine, you saw a father and his daughters. Nothing more, no crown, no kingdom, no politics. Just 3 people who needed help. And if I'd known, you might have helped anyway. Probably would have, but it would have been different. There would have been calculation in it. What this means, what I owe, what it could cost. He was right. Marin hated that he was right. You lied to me for 12 days. I did. Your name isn't even Thane. It is. It's my name. Just not the only one. Thane Corbett Morrison, Ashfeld, Crown Prince of the Northern Cascade Alliance, heir to the 7 territories, protector of... I get it, Marin said. You have titles, had Thane corrected. Past tense, I gave them up the day I left. And yet here you are, riding back. Because my father is dying. Because a man I've never trusted has seized control of my kingdom. Because my daughters deserve better than to grow up as pawns in someone else's game. He looked at her fully then. And because you asked me a question 12 days ago that I couldn't answer honestly then, but I can now. Marin waited. You asked what I was running from. The truth is I was running from a life where every choice was made for me. Where I was told who to marry, when to marry, how to rule, what to value. Where my daughters were assets to be managed instead of children to be loved. He took a breath. I ran because I wanted one choice that was mine. Just one. Even if it was the choice to freeze to death in a blizzard rather than go back to a palace that felt like a prison. And now I'm choosing to go back. But not as the man they wanted me to be. As the man you helped me remember I could be. The words settled between them. Not a declaration, not a promise, just a statement of fact. They rode in silence for another mile before Marin spoke again. Your father, tell me about him. Thane's expression softened in a way she hadn't seen before. Aldrich Ashfeld, 61 years old, king for 32 of them. Fair, just, probably the best king the Alliance has had in 2 centuries. But when my mother died, my real mother, not Isolde, he broke. Not visibly. He still ruled, still made decisions, still held the kingdom together. But he was hollow. And when Isolde came along 5 years later, beautiful and charming, and exactly what a grieving king thought he needed, he married her before anyone could point out that she was a viper in silk. You don't like her. I don't trust her. There's a difference. Thane's hands tightened on the reins. She's been pushing for influence since the day she married my father. Wants her bloodline in the succession. Wants control over policy. She wants your throne. She wants my son's throne. If she can force me into a marriage that produces a male heir, she can undermine my daughter's claim. The law says the throne passes to the firstborn child regardless of gender, but tradition says male heirs are stronger. And tradition is what people reach for when law becomes inconvenient. Marin absorbed this, the casual way he discussed his own daughters being written out of succession, the matter-of-fact acceptance that people would scheme for power over his dead body if necessary. This is what I'm walking into, she said. This is what you meant when you said the capital isn't like the mountain. Yes, and you want me there anyway. I need you there. Thane's gaze found hers and held. My father is dying. If you are right about the poison, you might be the only person who can save him. And if you save him, he can protect you from Voss and Isolde and everyone else who wants to use me against you. Thane flinched. When you say it like that, it sounds like I'm a pawn, a useful piece you're moving into position. Marin's voice was flat. No. Thane's response was immediate, sharp. You're not. Then what am I? The silence stretched. Thane opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. You're the woman my daughters call Mama. You're the reason I'm not dead in a ravine. He stopped, seemed to reconsider his approach. I don't have the right words for what you are, but it's not pawn, it's not peace, it's not strategy. What is it, then, necessary? The word came out quiet, certain. You're necessary. Marin studied him. At the man who was still, in some fundamental way, a stranger, a king she'd pulled from the snow, a father who'd given everything to save his children, a liar who'd told the truth where it mattered most. All right, she said. All right, I'll come. I'll treat your father. I'll face your court and your enemies and whatever politics you're dragging me into. She met his eyes. But not because you need me, because those girls need their grandfather. And because I'm curious to see what kind of kingdom produces men who think 50 gold coins can pay for a life. Thane's expression did something complicated. Relief and regret and something else she couldn't name. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Marin said. I haven't saved anyone. They rode until dusk, covering ground with the steady efficiency of people who knew how to travel hard. Royce called the halt in a clearing beside a river defensible and sheltered with good sightlines in all directions. The younger riders set up camp with practiced ease. Tents appeared. A fire was built. Rations were distributed. The girls were given hot soup and bread, then tucked into bedrolls in the wagon where they'd be warm and protected. Marin sat by the fire, checking her supplies one more time, making sure nothing had shifted or broken during the ride. Royce settled beside her, close enough for conversation, far enough to not crowd. You handled yourself well today, he said. I stood there and said no to gold. That's not handling myself. That's just being stubborn. Stubbornness is a virtue in the capital. You'll need it. He poked at the fire with a stick. Can I ask you something, Miss Frost? You can ask. Why did you refuse the money? Marin was quiet for a moment. She watched the flames dance orange and gold against the darkness. I had a husband once, she said. Daniel, stonemason, built our cabin with his own hands. Beautiful work. Square corners, tight seams, everything level. The kind of craftsmanship you can't buy, only earn. Royce waited. He died 2 years ago. Avalanche. I was the only healer within 20 miles, so I was the one who treated the bodies they brought down. She looked at Royce. I was the one who had to confirm that the man under the snow was my husband. I'm sorry. People offered me money after, called it charity, called it help. What it actually was them trying to buy their way out of feeling uncomfortable about a widow living alone. Marin shook her head. I didn't want their money then. I don't want the king's money now. Some things you can't pay for. Shouldn't try to. Royce studied her for a long moment. His Majesty is lucky you found him. Marin thought about that, about the mountain and its rules, about the storm that had detonated without warning, and the horse that had screamed, and the choice she'd made to step off her porch into a blizzard. The mountain put him in my path, she said finally. I don't think luck had much to do with it. You believe that I have lived at altitude long enough to know that the mountain has its own reasons for things. She looked at Royce. What rule did your king break? That's not, Royce stopped himself. Reconsidered. He trusted the wrong people. Let them get close. Let them whisper poison in his ear until he couldn't tell the difference between advice and manipulation anymore. Literally poison, it sounds like. If you're right, yes, Royce's expression was grim. And if Voss has been dosing King Aldrich for months, then we're already at war. We just haven't started fighting yet. Then we'd better get there before the fighting starts, Marin said. She stood, brushed off her skirt, and went to check on the girls one more time before sleep. They were awake, whispering to each other in the wagon bed, small faces illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the canvas. Mama Marin Breyer's voice, soft, uncertain in a way it hadn't been in days. Right here, little bird. Are we going to stay with you, Ash, this time? The practical one, the one who planned ahead. Yes, even when we get to Grandpa's, even then. Promise. Marin climbed into the wagon, settled between them, let them curl into her sides the way they had in the cabin. I promise, she said. Where you go, I go. She felt them relax, the tension draining out of small bodies that had been holding themselves ready for abandonment. Tell us about the mountain, Breyer whispered. So Marin did. She told them about the hawks and the aspens and the way snow sounds when it's cold enough to crunch like glass under your boots. She told them about Flint and his one horn and his inexplicable vendetta against laundry. She told them about the silence that lives at altitude, the kind that isn't empty, but full of things you can only hear when you stop making noise. She told them until they slept. And then she sat in the darkness, two small warm bodies pressed against hers, and wondered what she'd agreed to. A kingdom, apparently. Politics and poison and power plays she didn't understand. A man who was still half stranger, half something else. But also these girls. These two small, fierce creatures who'd chosen her without hesitation. Who'd looked at carriages and furs and honeyed cakes and chosen her rough hands instead. That was worth walking into fire for. That was worth whatever came next. Outside, Thane stood watch. She could see his silhouette against the firelight, tall, still alert. A king who'd learned to chop wood and fix roofs and split kindling. A father who'd given his coat and his warmth and damn near his life to keep his daughters breathing. A liar who'd told her one truth that mattered more than any crown. Marin closed her eyes and let herself sleep. Tomorrow they'd reach Ashfeld Keep. Tomorrow the real test would begin. But tonight, in a wagon beside a river with two small girls breathing steady and safe against her, she was exactly where she needed to be. She just had to trust that whatever came next, she was ready for it, even if she had no idea what ready actually looked like. They reached Ashfeld Keep on the second day, just as the sun broke over the eastern ridge and turned the fortress walls to gold. Marin had seen settlements before. Trading posts, mining camps. The small town of Elk Ridge, where she bought supplies twice a year. She thought she understood what a city looked like. She was wrong. Ashfeld Keep wasn't a city. It was a declaration. Stone walls 50 feet high, thick enough to march horses across the top. 7 towers rising like accusations against the sky. Banners everywhere, black and silver, the wolf sigil snapping in the wind. And behind the walls, buildings, hundreds of them. Thousands of people moving like blood through arteries, each one a small, bright point of life she could barely comprehend. The noise hit her before the smell. Voices, wheels, hammers, animals, industry. The smell came second. Wood smoke and cooking meat and unwashed bodies and horse dung and something else underneath it all. Something old and human and concentrated that made her nose wrinkle. "This is where you live," she said to Thane. "This is where I ruled," Thane corrected. "I never lived here. Not really." The gates opened as they approached. Guards in black and silver, dozens of them snapping to attention as Royce led the column through. People stopped in the streets, stared, whispered. The prince returned, with an Omega. "Who is she? Where has he been? Is that the healer? Look at her hands. Mountain woman. No family. Nobody." Maren heard every word. Let them wash over her like rain. She'd been nobody her whole life. It was a comfortable skin to wear. The girls heard it too. Briar's hand crept into Maren's. Ash moved closer, her small shoulder pressed against Maren's leg. "Ignore them," Maren said quietly. "They don't know us, they don't matter." But they were still staring as the column wound through streets that got progressively wider, progressively cleaner, progressively more obviously designed to impress. The buildings changed from wood to stone. The people changed from workers to merchants to nobles in fine clothes who stopped their conversations mid-sentence to watch the procession pass. And then the keep itself loomed ahead. Not a building, a mountain. Man-made, ancient, absolutely certain of its own permanence. The gates here were different, thicker, heavier, the kind that closed and didn't open again without blood being spilled. They opened for Thane without hesitation. Inside the courtyard was chaos dressed up as order. Servants running, nobles clustering, guards forming up. And cutting through all of it, a man, 50-something. Silver hair, sharp suit, sharper eyes. He moved like someone who'd spent his entire life calculating the exact amount of deference required to appear respectful while maintaining the upper hand. "Your Majesty," he said, approaching Thane with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank the stars. We feared the worst," Lord Chancellor Voss, Thane said. His voice was ice. "I'm sure you did." Voss's smile didn't flicker. "Your father has been asking for you, constantly." "The physicians say," he stopped, his gaze sliding to Maren. "But perhaps introductions first. This is Maren Frost," Thane said. "She saved my life, my daughter's lives." "How fortunate," Voss said. His eyes cataloged Maren in a single sweep. Omega, unmated, rough hands, homespun dress, no jewelry, no status, no threat. She could see the assessment happening, see herself being filed under irrelevant. "Good." Miss Frost. Voss continued, his tone warm in the way of people who've learned to weaponize courtesy. "The kingdom owes you a debt. I'm sure we can arrange suitable compensation." "No," Maren said. Voss blinked. "I'm sorry, I don't want compensation. I want to see the king." The courtyard went quiet, not silent too many people for that, but quiet enough that Maren knew everyone nearby had heard her. Voss's smile tightened. "The king is quite ill, Miss Frost. The physicians have been very clear about limiting visitors." "Then the physicians can explain their reasoning to me," Maren said. "I'm a healer. If the king is as sick as you say, he needs treatment, not isolation." "The physicians are the finest in the Alliance. Then they won't mind a second opinion." The silence deepened. Voss looked at Thane. "Your Majesty, surely you don't intend to let a forgive me a mountain herbalist examine your father without proper credentials?" "I intend to let the woman who kept me breathing through a fever that should have killed me examine my father, yes." Thane's voice could have cut glass. "Unless you have some reason to prevent it," the question hung in the air like a blade. "Of course not," Voss said smoothly. "I simply worry about the king's dignity. Having strangers poking and prodding?" "I'm not a stranger," Maren said. "I'm a healer." "There's a difference," she stepped forward. Close enough that Voss had to either hold his ground or step back. He held his ground, but she saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him reassessing. "Lord Chancellor," she said quietly, "if you're as concerned about the king's health as you claim, you'll take me to him now. Every minute we spend standing here talking is a minute he's not getting treatment." Voss's jaw worked. Behind him, nobles were watching. Guards were watching. Servants were pretending not to watch while watching intently. "Very well," he said. "Follow me." The interior of the keep was exactly what Maren expected. Stone corridors wide enough to march armies through. Tapestries depicting battles and wolves and stern-faced kings. Candles in silver sconces throwing light that never quite reached the shadows. They climbed stairs, more stairs than seemed necessary. More stairs than made sense for a sick man who couldn't walk. That was the first sign. The second was the guard outside the king's chamber, not the royal guard in black and silver. A private guard. Voss's colors. He's been secured, Voss said, noting Marin's gaze. For his own protection. From what confusion? The king has moments of clarity, but increasingly he becomes agitated. Believes people are trying to harm him. The physicians say it's the illness affecting his mind. Or it's not illness, Marin said. Voss's expression went carefully blank. I'm not sure I follow. Open the door, Marin said. He did. The room beyond was dark, heavy curtains drawn against the daylight. The air was thick, stale, carrying the particular smell of a sick room that's been closed up too long. Sweat and waste and something else. Something chemical. On the bed, a figure. King Aldrich Ashfeld looked like a man who'd been hollowed out and left to dry. Skin gray stretched too tight over bones that seemed suddenly too large for his frame. Hands trembling on the coverlet. Eyes closed, breath shallow and irregular. Marin crossed to him, ignored Voss's protest about letting him rest. Pressed her fingers to his wrist. Pulse was there. Fast, thready, irregular rhythm that spoke of a heart struggling to maintain basic function. She pulled back the covers, checked his pupils' dilated, sluggish response to light. Checked his tongue, white coating dried despite the water cup on the bedside table. Checked his skin, clammy cold with a slight tremor, running through the muscles even in sleep. How long has he been like this? She asked. The decline started 6 months ago, Voss said. Slowly at first, then more rapidly in the last 2 months. Marin moved to the bedside table. The water cup was full, fresh by the look of it. She lifted it to her nose. The smell was faint, bitter, hidden under mint and honey. She set the cup down very carefully. Who brings the king his water? The servants, of course. Which servants' names? Voss's eyes narrowed. Miss Frost, I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Marin said. I'm asking a direct question. Who has access to this room? Who brings food, water, medicine? The royal physicians oversee all treatment. Names, Marin repeated. Your Majesty, Voss said, turning to Thane. This is highly irregular. The king's care has been managed by the finest. Thane held up a hand. Answer her question. Voss's expression went cold. Chief physician Alderman oversees the king's treatment. His apprentice Marcus Wells administers the daily medications. The water and food are brought by the chambermaids, rotated on a schedule to prevent anyone from becoming too familiar. How convenient, Marin said. I'm sorry, a rotation. No one person responsible. No one who might notice a pattern. She looked at Voss directly. How much hemlock are you putting in his water? A drop per cup, 2. The room went dead silent. That is a serious accusation, Voss said. His voice was very quiet, very controlled, very dangerous. It's not an accusation, Marin said. It's a diagnosis. Your king is being poisoned. Slow-acting, carefully dosed to mimic natural decline. Hemlock derivative probably mixed with something to mask the taste. Administered daily in his water, or his medicine, or his food. Maybe all 3. You have no proof I have 30 years of healing experience and a nose that works. Marin picked up the water cup again. This smells like poison. Faint, but it's there. Many medicines smell bitter. Then let's test it. She held the cup toward Voss. Drink. Voss didn't move. Just a sip, Marin said. If it's harmless, you'll be fine. If it's not, she smiled without humor. Well, at least we'll know. Put down the cup, Voss said. Drink it. Miss Frost, drink it. The standoff held for 3 long seconds. Then Voss moved. Fast. His hand went to his belt to a knife Marin hadn't seen, and for a terrible moment she thought he was going to lunge. Royce was faster. The captain had been standing silent by the door. Now he was between Voss and Marin, his own blade drawn, the point resting very casually against Voss's throat. Drop it, Royce said. Voss's knife clattered to the floor. You just threatened the woman who saved the crown prince's life, Royce said conversationally, in front of witnesses, while she was examining the king. That's treason, 3 different ways. I'm almost impressed. I did no such thing. You drew steel in the king's chamber. Royce's blade didn't move. The penalty for that is death. Immediate. No trial. Thane stepped forward. His hand came to rest on Royce's shoulder. Not pulling him back. Just present. Take him, he said quietly. Secure him. Send for the royal guard, the real guard, not his men. I want him held in the tower until we can convene a proper tribunal. Your Majesty, you can't. I'm the crown prince. My father is incapacitated. That makes me acting regent. Thane's voice was flat. Absolute. I can do whatever I damn well please. Two guards materialized from the corridor. Not Voss's men, Royce's. They took the Chancellor by the arms and hauled him toward the door. This isn't over, Voss said. His composure was cracking now. Fury bleeding through. You think you can waltz back in here with your mountain whore and undo months of careful? The rest of the sentence was cut off as Royce hit him. One clean, efficient punch that dropped Voss like a stone. Apologies, Your Majesty, Royce said, shaking out his hand. He was resisting arrest. So I saw, Thane said. Get him out of here. They dragged Voss into the corridor. The door closed behind them. Meryn turned back to the king. I need supplies, she said. Activated charcoal milk thistle. Anything that can bind toxins and flush them from a system. I need fresh water, clean water from a source he hasn't been drinking from. I need someone I can trust to bring it. You have me, Thane said. Not you. You need to be visible. Dealing with Voss, managing the court, preventing this from turning into chaos. She looked at him. I need someone who knows the keep, knows the people, and doesn't have a target on their back. Royce Thane said immediately. The captain had returned, closing the door behind him. He raised an eyebrow. You're now the royal healer's assistant, Thane said. Congratulations. I've been demoted, Royce said. Wonderful. What do you need, Miss Frost? Meryn told him. He nodded once and disappeared. Alone with Thane and the unconscious king, Meryn began to work. She stripped the bed, checked every surface for residue, found traces of the same bitter compound on the rim of a medicine bottle, in the honey pot, in the mint leaves used to flavor his tea. Thorough, she said. Whoever did this was very thorough. Voss has had months, Thane said. He was standing by his father's bedside, one hand resting on the old man's shoulder. Months of access, months of opportunity. Why poison? Why not just... Meryn stopped herself. Just kill him outright. Thane's voice was bitter. Because a king dying suddenly raises questions. A king declining slowly from natural causes. That's just tragedy. No investigation, no suspicion. And while everyone's focused on mourning and succession, Voss consolidates power. Through you, through the marriage contract. If I'm forced to wed Seraphine Crow, Voss's niece, he gets direct influence over the next generation. And if I refuse, if I fight it, I look like a selfish child putting personal desires over the kingdom's stability. Checkmate, Meryn said. Would have been. Thane looked at her. If you hadn't recognized the poison, I'm a healer. It's what I do. You're more than that, Thane said quietly. The door opened. Royce returned with an armload of supplies. Behind him, two servants with buckets of clean water. From the well in the east courtyard, Royce said. Hasn't been used in years. I tested it first. It's clean. Good. Meryn began mixing, activated charcoal and water to bind the toxins, milk thistle to protect the liver, dandelion root to support the kidneys. She worked with the efficient precision of someone who'd done this before, who'd pulled people back from the edge, so many times that the movements were automatic. She got the mixture down the king's throat in careful spoonfuls. Waited, mixed more, administered it again. Hours passed, Thane stayed. Royce came and went bringing updates. Voss was secured. Isolde was demanding answers. The court was in chaos. Half the nobles thought Thane had staged a coup. The other half thought he'd lost his mind. Let them think what they want, Thane said. Just keep them away from this room. Evening came. The king's color improved fractionally. The tremors lessened. Midnight. His breathing deepened, became more regular. Dawn. His eyes opened. They were amber, lighter than Thane's but the same. They focused on Meryn with surprising clarity. You're not Alderman, he said. His voice was rough, unused, but stronger than she'd expected. I'm Meryn Frost, she said. I'm a healer, the mountain healer. Aldrich's gaze moved to his son. Royce told me everything. How they clung to you, how they refused the carriage, how they called you Mama without hesitation. He said they were different, calmer, safer, more themselves than they had been in months. Meryn felt something shift in her chest, the weight of being seen, not assessed or cataloged, but truly seen. You brought her here, Aldrich said. She saved my life. Twice. Once in a blizzard, once from my own stupidity. The stupidity of running, Aldrich said. It wasn't a question. The stupidity of thinking I could run far enough to escape, Thane corrected. He pulled a chair close to the bed, sat. Father Voss has been poisoning you for months. Hemlock derivative in your water, your medicine, your food. Aldrich closed his eyes, not in disbelief, in resignation. I know, he said. The room went still. You knew, Thane repeated. I suspected, for weeks. But I had no proof, no allies I could trust. He tried to give orders to stop his own treatment, claiming confusion. They said it was the illness affecting his mind. He opened his eyes again. I was trapped, dying slowly while everyone stood around telling me I was imagining things. Marin felt something cold settle in her chest. That's why you asked for Thane. Why you kept asking. If I could get my son back, I could stop this. Aldrich's hand trembling reached for Thane's, but he was gone, running. And I couldn't blame him. I'd made his life unbearable. You were trying to secure the succession. I was trying to control you, Aldrich said, because I was scared. Because after your mother died, after I failed her, I thought if I could just arrange everything perfectly, plan everything exactly, I could prevent any more loss. Instead, you drove me away. Instead, I drove you away. Aldrich agreed, and nearly got myself killed for it. Voss is in custody, Marin said. But there are questions we need answered. Who else was involved? How deep does this go? The physicians were complicit, Aldrich said. Alderman at minimum, possibly Wells. Isolde? He stopped. I don't know, she benefited from my decline, but whether she knew the cause? We'll find out, Thane said. There will be a tribunal. Public. Every charge laid out, every conspirator named. And the marriage contract, Void Thane said. You signed it under duress while being poisoned. No court in the Alliance would uphold it. Aldrich's eyes moved to Marin again. And what's her place in this? Thane stopped, seemed to struggle for words. I'm the girl's guardian, Marin said. That's all, liar, liar, Aldrich said, but his tone was gentle. Amused even. They chose you, without hesitation, without doubt. Children that young don't choose wrong. He looked at Marin directly. Stay, he said. Not for me, not for Thane, for Ash and Briar. They need you. They have me, Marin said. But I'm not a queen. I'm not a lady. You're a healer, Aldrich interrupted. That's worth more than any title. The tribunal convened 7 days later. 7 days of investigation. 7 days of testimonies extracted from servants and physicians and guards. 7 days of Aldrich's health improving under Marin's care, his strength returning in increments that felt miraculous, until you understood it was just the absence of poison allowing his body to heal. 7 days of Marin being fitted for clothes she didn't want tutored in courtesies, she didn't understand, and generally treated like a curiosity by nobles who couldn't decide if she was a threat or a joke. The girls stayed close. Ash and Briar became her shadows, following her through corridors. She still got lost in helping her remember which fork went where and which bow was appropriate for which rank. They also, she discovered, had been teaching themselves to read using her medical journals. We want to be healers like you, Ash said solemnly. Why? Marin asked. Because you fix things, Briar said. People, animals, everything. You make them better. Marin didn't know what to say to that, so she just hugged them both and pretended she wasn't crying. The tribunal was held in the Great Hall. Public, open, witnessed by every noble in the Alliance who could make the journey. Marin sat in the front row. Thane had offered her a place on the dais next to him. She'd refused. This wasn't her fight. She was just the healer who'd recognized poison. Except it was her fight, because the girls were sitting beside her, small hands gripping hers, watching their father stand before the court in his full regalia and look like a king. Lord Chancellor Magnus Voss was brought forward in chains. The charges were read: attempted regicide, conspiracy, treason. The evidence was laid out in meticulous detail. The poison samples, the testimony from servants who'd been pressured into delivering tainted water. And then Thane stepped forward, holding a sheaf of parchment. These were found in Voss's quarters during the search, he said. Correspondence between the Chancellor and my stepmother, spanning 6 months. He read aloud, the king's condition worsens daily. Thane grows more resistant. Perhaps if the situation became urgent, he would see reason. Do what you must, Magnus, for the kingdom. Another letter. Excellent progress. Aldrich barely rises from bed now. When Thane returns, if he returns, the council will be ready to act. Isolde's face drained of color. Those are taken out of context. Context, Aldrich said coldly, from the dais, is that you knew. You knew he was poisoning me, and you encouraged it. The hall erupted, nobles shouting, guards moving, Isolde trying to speak over the chaos. Thane raised his hand. Silence fell. Chief Physician Alderman broke first. Confessed everything. The doses, the timing, the careful calibration to mimic natural decline. Voss said nothing. Refused to speak, to defend himself, to show anything but cold contempt. Until Aldrich asked the question. Why? Voss looked at the king, at the man he'd tried to kill. Because you were weak, he said. Because you let sentiment cloud your judgment. Because your son was worse running away like a child instead of facing his responsibilities. Thane's expression didn't change. So you tried to kill me, Aldrich said. And then, what? Take the throne yourself, through proper channels, Voss said. Through Seraphine and her children. Through a regency that would stabilize the alliance and remove the chaos your family has introduced. Chaos, Aldrich repeated. Your granddaughters are female. Your son refuses to remarry appropriately. Your house is dying and you're too sentimental to see it. The hall went silent. Aldrich stood. Slowly with Thane's help, but he stood. My house, he said, is not dying. My granddaughters are brilliant, fierce, and more capable at 5 than you'll ever be. My son has proven himself a better king in 12 days than you would have been in a lifetime. And the woman who saved all our lives. He gestured to Meryn, is worth more than every noble in this room combined. He turned to the court. The charges are proven. The sentence is exile, permanent. Lord Magnus Voss, you are stripped of lands, title, and position. You will be escorted to the northern border and released. If you return, you will be executed. Voss's face went white. Exile was worse than death. Death was clean, quick remembered. Exile was erasure. Guards took him. He fought, screaming about justice and tradition and the old ways. The hall watched him dragged away in silence. When he was gone, Aldrich spoke again. Isolde Ashfeld, step forward. The dowager approached. Still beautiful, still composed. But her hands trembled. You were complicit, Aldrich said. The letters prove it. But you did not administer the poison yourself. You did not directly threaten the throne. He paused. You are stripped of your title. You will retire to the summer estate. You will not return to court. You will not contact my granddaughters. You will live out your remaining years quietly, or you will join Voss in exile. Isolde's composure cracked, just for a moment. Just long enough for everyone to see the fury underneath. Then she curtsied. Perfect. Poisonous. As your majesty commands, she said, and she walked out with her head high. The tribunal concluded. The court dispersed. But Royce approached the dais before the nobles had fully cleared. He carried a leather folder worn with age. Your Majesty, he said to Aldrich, during the investigation we traced Miss Frost's lineage. Her mother's family name was Thornwood. Aldrich's eyes sharpened. Thornwood. The Northern Thornwoods, the same. Minor house but old blood. Miss Frost's mother was Lady Alara Thornwood, disowned when she made it a beta stonemason and left court. Meryn stared. My mother she never mentioned? She wouldn't have, Royce said gently. She chose love over title, same as you. Aldrich smiled. So the mountain hermit has noble blood after all. The council will find that very convenient. I don't want them to find it convenient, Meryn said. I didn't earn anything through bloodline. No, Thane said quietly. You earned it by coming down a rope in a blizzard. The bloodline just makes it easier for stubborn nobles to accept what they should have accepted from the start. Justice, such as it was, had been served. Meryn found herself standing in the courtyard as the sun set, watching the nobles file out in their carriages, heading home to their estates and their comfortable distance from treason. You did it, Thane said, appearing beside her. You did it, Meryn corrected. I just recognized poison. You saved my father's life. You saved your daughter's. Thane was quiet for a moment. Then stay. I've been here 7 days. Stay permanently. Thane turned to face her. Not as a guest, not as the healer who happened to be here. As he stopped, seemed to reconsider. As part of this family, this kingdom. Meryn looked at him, at the king who chopped wood and fixed roofs and held her hands like they mattered. I'm not royal, she said. Neither was my mother. She was the daughter of a merchant, made soap of all things. He smiled. My father married her anyway, caused a scandal that lasted 5 years. Best decision he ever made. What are you asking me? I'm asking if you'll let me court you properly, with witnesses and time and no lies between us. I'm asking if you'll consider a future where those girls who call you mama actually are yours, where he gestured at the keep, the kingdom becomes something you're part of, not something you're visiting. And if I say no, then I'll accept it. And you'll go back to your mountain, and I'll send letters twice a year so the girls don't forget you. And I'll rule the best I can without the woman who taught me what home actually means. Marin was quiet. In the window above, she could see Ash and Briar watching, small, small faces pressed against the glass. I'll stay, she said, for them, not for you, not yet. Yet is good, Thane said. Yet I can work with. 6 months later, spring came to Asheville Keep, the way spring came to mountains. Sudden, bright, undeniable. Marin stood in the Royal Healing Academy, her academy, the one she'd built with Aldrich's funding and Thane's political support, and watched 12 Omega students practice suturing on pigskin. She was pregnant, 5 months. It showed now, though she tried to hide it under loose tunics. Ash and Briar knew, had known before she did, with the uncanny perception of children who paid attention. We're getting a sister, Briar had announced one morning at breakfast. How do you know it's a sister, Marin had asked. Because we asked, Ash said solemnly. Thane had choked on his coffee. They'd married quietly. No grand ceremony, no political spectacle. Just Aldrich and Royce and the girls, and a priest who'd agreed to perform the ceremony on the mountain at Marin's cabin, with Flint in attendance. The goat had eaten Thane's formal jacket. Everyone agreed it was an auspicious sign. Now Marin taught, healed, expanded the clinic network across the Alliance. Fought with nobles who thought Omegas shouldn't have property rights, and won more often than she lost. Thane ruled beside his father. Aldrich had postponed his abdication, citing the need for experienced leadership during transition. Really, he just wanted more time with his granddaughters. The girls thrived, read everything, asked questions that made philosophers weep. Followed Marin through the hospital wards and learned to clean wounds and mix medicine and tell people the truth even when it hurt. And in the evenings when the work was done and the kingdom was quiet, they sat together. All of them, the king who'd learned to let go, the son who'd learned to come home, the healer who'd learned that family was something you chose, and the 2 small girls who'd chosen first. Tomorrow they'd return to the mountain, a week-long visit. Aldrich wanted to see where his son had almost died, wanted to meet Mrs. Kowalski and her legendary meanness, wanted to understand what had pulled Thane back from the edge. The strawberries would be ripe by now, wild alpine strawberries, tiny and intensely sweet, growing in the meadow behind the cabin. Ash had asked about them every week since they'd left in November. Briar had drawn pictures of them, red smudges on parchment that Marin kept folded in her medical journal. Tomorrow they'd pick them together. All of them, the way Marin had promised that first week when the girls were still learning that promises made to them would be kept. But tonight they sat by the fire in the royal chambers, and Briar asked the question, Mama Marin, will you tell our baby sister about the blizzard? Marin's gaze moved from her daughters to Thane, then settled on Aldrich, dozing in his chair, healthy whole here. Every word she said, starting with how the mountain gives to those who earn it. And I earned a kingdom, Aldrich murmured, without opening his eyes. You earned a family, Marin corrected. Same thing the old king said. And in the firelight, with spring beginning outside and life beginning inside, and love wrapping around all of them, like the warmth they'd learned to trust, Marin thought maybe he was right. The mountain had given her a choice. She'd chosen them, and they'd chosen her right back. That was all that mattered. That was everything.